let's go ahead and dive into a little bit of the staff raises and stuff like that. So do you have those up on the screen?
I do not, actually. I
So
can
I have
pull
them
my
up
Twitter
here.
though.
I have them up here. So Donovan Raiola gets a raise up to $650K. Dvorak, $450K. And Mike Eckler, $625K, officially $50,000 more than he made over at Tennessee. He got paid pretty well. So what are your thoughts overall on those contracts?
I think it couldn't be more deserved, especially for Dvorak. I think of all the original hires from Rule's first staff, he's probably the most underrated or underappreciated one. He came in super young. He's like 30 years old and unproven. And what he did with that linebacker room and so far 2 seasons has been absolutely phenomenal. Yep. And Raiola has been, like we've said over and over again, he just continues to get a better line every single year. So well-deserved. And I think the only way to get Eckler to leave Tennessee was to pay him a number that he can't say no to, and that was $625. Which, for comparison, Foley was at $550 last year, I think. So we're talking $75,000 raise comparatively to Foley.
$550, and I'd be curious to see who is the highest paid special teams coordinator in college football.
My guess it's somewhere in the SEC.
Yeah.
Probably maybe Bama or Georgia.
Let's see. So Jeff Banks, that was 2021. So they had limbo. They're talking about a couple from the last. So as of 2024 season, the highest paid special teams coordinator in college football include Jeff Banks. 2021, Banks was reported to have a salary of $1 million. Pete Limbo, South Carolina, December 2022. Limbo's salaries increased $725K per year with a contract extension through the end of 2025. So that still puts him up there.
Yeah, that's top 5.
Probably in that top 5 range, because you got to think not a lot of people. I mean, that job just there is almost $300K from those two. So you got to think he's probably top 5. And
I think Butler as the DC, was it reported like 875 or so? I think, which is on the lower end.
Yeah, I think so.
Now it is at least.
Yeah. Probably, I don't know if it's probably incentive based, but he's definitely going to get, if he comes out and shows out year 1, he's definitely going to get a bump there. D-line coach Terry Bradden's also going to make $400K in his first year, with it moving to $425K in year 2. So
he's now in Lincoln after losing the Super Bowl.
Yep, that started 12:01 the day after the Chiefs' final game on his contract. So kind of getting those all set in stone. But yeah, Matt Rule is just kind of not really playing games. He's getting these guys paid, getting them in here, and trying to make sure he gets something rolling. So great to see Donovan Raiola get that pay increase, though. Like, well deserved. I think we've talked about this before, but the insane jump from the offensive line from years prior, even into 2023, 2024, that offensive line made a huge jump. And that's with working with a lot of the same players, they had prior. I've just seen constant improvement from this line, no matter who they got to throw in there. Sometimes they had to throw, in 2023, the entire, was it the left side of that line was toast. At one point, I think it was the entire line. 4 out of 5 linemen were injured.
Yeah, you lost like Teddy, you lost Turner, you lost, I think you didn't lose Ben Scott for a short period of time too that year. I mean, it was wild.
Yep. And so what we're going to do here too, and I did this yesterday on kind of the Generation Red podcast, but we're going to talk through we're going to talk to the 2023, 2024, 2025 staffs, and kind of talk a little bit about each one of those. And then we're going to kind of break down what we think this staff is going to be, and kind of who we're most excited about in terms of, the overall staff and assistants. And you probably heard my pick yesterday, but we'll dive into that. So let's just go ahead and run out with the 2023 staff. So the 2023 staff, of course, they had Tony White as actually an associate head coach / DC. Offensive coordinator was Marcus Satterfield, and of course he was also with the quarterbacks and tight ends as well. Ed Foley, special teams coordinator. EJ Barthel, running backs coach. Evan Cooper with the DBs and the defensive pass game coordinator. Voracek with linebackers. Terrence Knighton with the line, Garrett McGuire with the wide receivers, offensive line, Raiola, and then Bob Wager with the tight ends, strength and conditioning, Corey Campbell. We mentioned him last night on that podcast too. Corey Campbell is a name that never gets mentioned in the negative light for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
We talked about just how his job is. He's got some of the best job security you can probably have in college football, just because he has done absolute great work. No soft tissue injuries, barely. These guys, the strength and conditioning program has turned completely around since the days of, oh my gosh, who was that under Frost?
Oh my gosh. It was the guy that was like huge.
Yeah.
His claim to fame was that linebacker from Buffalo, Mac.
Didn't he not have them doing squats?
Yeah, they didn't do squats. I forget his name, but Frost rehired him too at UCF. Yeah.
Duval.
Said it in the chat. Yeah.
Duval. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh God, brings me back to when I was living in Jacksonville.
It can't get worse than their new coach, Duval.
Yeah, no. So just talking about that staff in general, a lot of the issues there, I think that was a little bit of too much of Matt Rule trusting in his other guys. And when I talked about this yesterday, I don't think, because I think what he's good at is evaluating staff, coaching staff members whenever it's people he doesn't know personally. I think when it's people he knows personally, he kind of almost lifts them up a little bit in his view, as opposed, I don't think he really went and looked at Satterfield at South Carolina and took that for what it was.
Bias.
Yeah, he's got, because I feel like if he would have watched what he did at South Carolina, I think he gave him the benefit of the doubt, because it's like, oh, he didn't coach under me. And do you think there's some credence to that? Because I feel like that's been part of the issue.
His best hires have been guys that were not affiliated with him. Tony White was an electric hire. It was probably not the most popular at the time, but it proved to be the best hire of that entire first staff, I think.
Agreed. Yeah. And like you look at moving forward with Dana Holgorsen. Yeah. And so but as I'll get to in a little bit, the one thing I do appreciate is the fact that he does have those biases, yet still is, knows that his ass on the line. He can pull the trigger to move these guys out of their, demote them, whether he gets rid of them or not, demote them, move them somewhere else, do something, which was something Frost really struggled with.
One of my videos, my last one, I should say, that was one thing I pointed out. Like, Frost didn't make a change until Trev forced him to, when he brought in Whipple.
Yep.
And then even Mike Riley was forced to get rid of Banker. Was that Mike Riley?
Yeah, I think so.
Got rid of Banker and brought in frickin' pretty boy from Notre Dame.
Oh, Diaco?
Yeah, Diaco.
Bob Diaco.
And then Bill Callahan never changed his staff. And then Bo Pelini, when he changed his staff, it was just internal promotions.
Yep.
They never got rid of people when they were clearly the weight that was holding the ship back.
There was
And
no
that's one
accountability.
thing. Yeah. And one thing Rule has that I like is he understands yeah, you're my friend, but this is a business and I need a new special teams coordinator. So Foley, you're gone. Sat, the offense sucks. We need to do something different. I think you'll be a great tight end coach, but I'm bringing in Dana to take over the offense. And I love that he's willing to make these necessary changes.
Especially with Sat, his best friend. However, let me ask you a question. Do you think had Sat not come out and said the ridiculous stuff that he did in that press conference and got all that public backlash, do you think he still makes that move?
You're talking about the one where he's I want to average 5.3 yards per play, which is one of the worst in the country.
He doesn't know how many yards they average per play.
I think let's take ourselves back, okay? Remember January, February of last year, we all saw the picture of Dana Holgorsen at the wrestling match with Matt Rule.
Yep.
And that was after he got let go at Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you think back forward, after he was the interim offense coordinator, he said that Matt brought him in over the winter to take over the offense, and it wasn't a good fit at that time.
Yep.
I think Matt Rule was trying to replace Satterfield last year. Yeah. And then when Dana was hey, it's just timing's not right. I just got fired. I'm getting $6 million to do nothing. That's when he's okay, well, I got to stick with Sat.
Yeah.
And then it got so bad where he's I don't have an option. Let's go bring this guy in. I'll pay you whatever you want.
Yep. exactly.
I think the plan all along was to get rid of Seth as the OC at least.
Yeah, because there was a lot of talk about, that entire offseason about like Holgorsen and what's going on with him, but it seemed like everything was just kind of like it seemed like speculation, but at the same time, you knew the conversations were going on, but it never progressed past a certain point of legitimacy. And I do think maybe that kind of expedited it. I think that was kind of like he's like, I have to do something, because then it started looking bad on him. But yeah, I do think that was, but at the same time, it's a good thing it happened when it did, just because it gave, the offseason a little bit of a spark. The offense finally had something to put on tape that, the portal guys could look at and be like, okay, I want to go play in that offense, or recruits you can point to and say, I want to go play in that offense, because there's a potential that we don't get a guy like, a Dane Key even, if Satterfield is the offense that they throw out. Like, that's what they have to look at. You're trying to recruit a guy like that who has NFL first round NFL aspirations. I don't think he's coming to play here. But looking back at that first season too, I was in the camp of, because a lot of people were just like, get rid of Satterfield, after that first season. But I was in the camp of kind of wait and see. I gave him a little bit of grace because of, first year, the injuries that happened, Jeff Sims being a complete nightmare at the quarterback position.
Oh my gosh.
And again, a lot of people forget this, but Casey Thompson was supposed to be in that quarterback room as well, but pivoted the last second, surprised everybody. So then it was just kind of Jeff Sims' show from there. So I gave him a little bit of grace in that first season. Where were you kind of standing with that?
I was the same way. I went to that season opener in Minnesota, and I was a little concerned after that game, but you have to put it into perspective. Like, they're installing an entire new offense. These are all new coaches. They brought in a new QB. So you're like, okay, it's going to take some time. It's going to be patient. By game 5 or 6, you start to get a little worried. But by that time, you'd lost Billy Kemp. You had lost Marcus Washington. You had lost
Trey Palmer.
Yep. And then there was another injury at wide receiver, I believe. But then Gabe Ervin got hurt again. IGC. Yeah, IGC. And then you lost Gabe Ervin, and then you lost Turner, and then you lost Teddy. Like, there's so many injuries, and then you have to put that on top of Jeff Sims, who was a complete disaster.
Yeah.
And so maybe it was a bad evaluation on top of injuries. So I gave him a pass, and I said, we'll see what we look like next year. Because Heinrich Harburg was very limited.
He was.
And the one thing about Heinrich, at least last year, that I give him and Seth the benefit of the doubt was they ran a system that at least was remotely good for Heinrich. It wasn't a bunch of throwing. It was a lot of option, a lot of QB keepers. They took shots when they needed, but they just, even then too, you're down to Jalen Lloyd and Malachi Coleman, receiver, two true freshmen.
Yeah.
There's just, everything was stacked against Satterfield that first year. Then going into year 2, that's when I think things changed for a lot of people really quickly, like by game 2 or 3.
Yep. And then one more thing before I get into the comments here too is, because I kind of did a video breaking down just how, Casey Thompson, people were like, really kind of high on him after he left, like, oh, I wish we had Casey. But another thing too about Casey Thompson is I did a breakdown just how much his numbers would have been different without Trey Palmer just having that explosive speed and just being able to run a go route and hit him, over 1,000 yards. And Casey Thompson had a little over 2,000 yards passing. Would Casey Thompson been that same player without Trey Palmer? Probably not. So losing that, I don't think people factored in how big of a loss it was to lose Trey Palmer. It was the best receiver we ever had. So
what's crazy is he's a 7th-round draft pick and like the 4th-string receiver on the Buccaneers.
Unbelievable.
That's our best receiver ever.
Unbelievable. That's kind of crazy. Let me dive into, so no raise for the strength and conditioning coach. None that we know of. None that have been announced or anything like that. I'm sure he's getting.
I think there's more raises coming. I'm
sure he's going to get paid. Yeah, absolutely. I think he'll get paid. They're going to do everything they can to keep Corey Campbell here. Hell's breaking loose in Seward. My childhood babysitter is getting wrecked in the media. What? I have no idea what's going on.
I have no idea what's going on.
It was the mail. What is happening? Sad for the families. Somebody want to fill us in on that. Bone Lake Corn Fed. Yeah, no, not yet. Never mind, me's confused too. Let's face it. Going from 5 to 7 to 6 and 6 with flop rule and co. Better get it going. an L to Cincy would be disastrous. We'll dive into that here in just a second too when we go over the new staff. But yeah, loss to Cincy would kind of be a disaster on the surface.
They have good QB, but that's about it.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that is true, Feng Wei. Looking at, some of the other stuff there. So we gave him a little bit of grace that season. And 2024 though it was just kind of like one of those things. He's got to whip his ass in gear. Looking through the rest of it, Foley, Barthel, let's see, Evan Cooper. We can talk about those in the 2024 staff. Dvorak, T. Knight, McGuire, Raiola, Wager, and then Campbell. So let's go to the 2024 staff.
Okay.
And looking through the 2024 staff, we had, hold on, where is it? Matt Rule, and again, associate head coach Tony White, offensive coordinator Satterfield, Glenn Thomas. Now was it added to the quarterbacks? Now, what was your kind of thought on the Glenn Thomas hire? I loved it. I did a video breaking down Glenn Thomas too. Two of Matt Ryan's 3 Pro Bowl seasons were with Glenn Thomas at the helm. He just had a history of creating good quarterbacks and high level quarterbacks, but at the same time, people were pointing to the Steelers situation, what was going on there, but he wasn't the quarterback coach there. He was an analyst, offensive analyst there. So, what was your take on the Glenn Thomas hire and how that's aged too?
I think they tried to get Glenn Thomas originally on the first staff. It was either him or the other guy that's from Nebraska. He's a coach on the Rams, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank on his name, and they tried to get either one of those guys.
Oh, Jake Peets.
Jake Pete. And both said no, so they kind of were scrambling to fill that staff, which Rule didn't have a lot of time to fill his original staff. But I like Glenn Thomas. He gives you professional pedigree, proven track record of success. I mean, Matt Ryan, I think, won the MVP the year he was his QB coach, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So he's proven. For me as a college coach, though, because it's been a little bit since he's coached in college, I'd say I'm to be determined on how I feel. Right now, everything's kind of pointing in the right direction.
Yep.
I think next year we see a lot because we should see a massive jump from Dylan Raiola going into year 2. And even too, you think like the limited action we saw from Heinrich. What game was that where he came in when Dylan got hurt? Was that UCLA, I think, maybe?
This last season?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's all it could have been.
Yeah, I don't remember which game it was, but we ended up losing the game. But you saw limited action from Heinrich, and I liked what I saw from Heinrich. That
mechanics improved.
Yeah, mechanics improved. He was really decisive. He was a quick thinker. He was he looked at least confident in what he was going out to accomplish. Now he's a tight end, but in that little snippet we saw from Heinrich, you could see just the year-over-year growth. And that was one off season with Thomas. Yeah,
and even though he came in like really late in that game. Yeah, and the thing about it is too, like one of the biggest things I noticed, even in the spring game with Heinrich, is he had a big problem with him, throwing that leaving that shoulder, throwing it wide open, and that's why his accuracy on the deep ball struggled. Instead of kind of like keeping that, kind of this arm up here and keeping that front shoulder closed. When it flies open like that, you have no accuracy. There's going to be no consistency. So he did a much better job too. Yeah. Much better job of keeping that kind of that shoulder closed and being able to fire the ball with a little bit more accuracy.
Yeah. So there were certainly some things we saw early that kind of say, okay, this guy is clearly legit. We just got to see year 2 now with him.
For sure. Yeah. So Glenn Thomas was the big change there. Of course, everything else staying the same. Barthel, Cooper, Dvorak, Knighton, McGuire, and Raiola. Let me pull it up here. So now we're going to focus too on not only the staff, but the title changes too, because that was interesting. Offensive coordinator on quarterbacks coach, Glenn Thomas was the co-OC before and quarterbacks coach. And then of course that title was removed whenever Holgorsen came in. So I think that's a little bit of, when they brought Glenn Thomas over, they did want him to have that extra title. Looks a little better on the resume. Marcus Satterfield was still calling the plays though. Now, do you think whenever, shut up, Gunner, my dog's whining. Dana Holgorsen came in. Do you think that was part of the stipulation? It's like he wants this to be his offense. No co-OCs, none of that. Yeah. Like he
even said coach. Too, like my one recommendation was my one requirement was to have Da'Keil Shorts as my wide receiver coach.
Yep.
And he was like, okay, yeah, we'll make it happen.
Yep.
It's 100% going to be Dana Holgorsen. I don't think Matt Rule, the way I kind of look at it is like there's Matt Rule up here, and he's overseeing his coaching staff. But his coaching staff, like DC and OC, are going to run their systems, and Matt Rule will just kind of make sure they're doing something that he likes. But he's not going to go and say we need to run a 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5. He's going to let Butler do his thing. He's going to let Dana do his thing.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I was because that was the next question I was going to ask, because I talked about this yesterday. I also think Butler's going to have the same thing, where it's Butler's going to be like, they're going to be the head coach of their side of the ball.
Yep.
And I think Matt Rule wants to have almost a general manager head coach approach to this. I think he's really trying to get this operating more in kind of an NFL like way. Even talked about that with the roster, breaking it up into 2 53-man rosters, and having one for the guys who are developing and trying to make it to the other 53-man roster, which are the guys that are going to be playing on the 2 deeps and stuff like that. And in that regular rotation, and of course, adjust as injuries happen and stuff like that. So it does seem like he's really kind of taking more so of like, he wants to oversee everything, still be pretty hands-on. He is pretty hands-on, but let those guys run the show. And I think that's what those guys want too. I think Butler wants to run his show. Dana Holgorsen, we know for a fact, wants to run his part of the show too. So interesting note there with that co-OC removal from Glenn Thomas's. And of course, we got Butler, John Butler coming on. And what were your initial thoughts on the John Butler hire? Mine were, I don't know if you saw my video about the SMU DC, but
yeah, I thought we were supposedly interviewing him.
Scott Simons, we did.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys who was like late in the process. I wondered too if part of that was, because of course SMU making the playoffs. I wondered if like he was really like legitimately in it, but Nebraska had to make a defensive coordinator hire. But I also think at the same time, like John Butler was kind of the guy that maybe Matt Rule had in mind when he brought him on. And so I'm not sure how that worked out. I'm not sure, because I would have loved Scott Simons. He was an excellent defensive coordinator. So that was, to me, would have been my preferred. So I would have said Scott Simons would have been my number one. But, where was kind of Butler on that for you?
He wasn't on the top of my list, but I remember when Nebraska hired him, I think back to that interview where he was like, I want to be a defensive coordinator. And if that means sitting out a year, I'll sit out a year. Well, then he ends up at Nebraska. So that was like, you kind of just put stories together and make it the story that, okay, he's more than likely your next defensive coordinator. And then, this is just thinking back, like you start putting these pieces together. Remember, they brought in Phil Snow. He was like an off-site analyst. They brought him in-house. Now he's an analyst. And it was like, in my opinion, that was them kind of starting to move Tony out. Like, Tony, you're great, but you're not doing what we think we need to be doing. And they're easing him out and letting John Butler come in. I think personally, he's going to run a similar system as Tony White, but I think there's going to be different variations. I don't think it'll be strictly a 3-3-5. It could be a 4-2-5. And they announced that McCullough is going to be an edge player. So I could see them running like a 3-3-5, but really it's more like 4 down linemen. They're going to have McCullough standing up on the edge, or like Willis McGahee or something like that, just to have a 4-man front. I think he's going to bring a lot more pressure than Tony White did. There was a lot of issues that I thought were with Tony White's defense, where 3rd and longs, 2nd and longs, it was like, I'm going to just try and get home with 3, or I'm going to try and get home with 4. And then I'm going to have these weird coverages where these, like, all my defensive backs are 8-10 yards off the ball. And that just frees up everything under the middle. And then they just killed us by, 1,000 paper cuts, essentially. I don't think Butler's going to do that as much. I think he's going to have more of an NFL concept where his DBs are more press coverage. Even if they're in zone, they'll be lined up to kind of disrupt the route, and then they'll drop back into their zone.
Yep, I agree. It's going to be a multiplicity of schemes and fronts, because Butler, coming from the NFL, 3-3-5 was something he had to kind of learn too. So I think we're going to see a lot more 4-man fronts. We may even occasionally see bear fronts. We may occasionally see 5 hands in the dirt, depending on who we're playing. But we're going to see a lot more 4-man fronts, and there is going to be elements of 3-3-5 still there. But 4-2-5 is, 4-2-5 and 3-3-5 are similar in what their goal and intention are, which is to keep up with the faster pace of like the modern spread offenses. And one of them, you get rid of that extra D lineman for a defensive back. The other one, you swap out a linebacker for a defensive back. So, I think we're definitely going to see a lot more of kind of that 4-3, 4-2-5 look. But definitely, Matt Rule had mentioned he wants to keep, with that kind of 3-3-5 in there as well. So, but I just think John Butler is going to mix it up a lot more. Tony White tended to be reactive. Wouldn't make adjustments mid-game. He would make adjustments after the game.
We saw that with Indiana versus Ohio State.
Yeah, because in Indiana, we had those three down linemen, and we're getting dominated at the point of attack. And then he came out in Ohio State, and he started running a little bit more of those forward hands in the dirt, which we didn't see before that moment. So, yeah, I think John Butler is going to be a lot more proactive with his. And looking at – so let's go – let's see here. You mentioned it before. So Butler's a lot to prove this year. So the one thing, too, and I'll go back through these other comments as well, but one of the things that Butler, I think, got a bad rap for last year was the fact that, and people kind of don't understand. I mean, he was thrown into, a situation late because of what happened with Cooper. And not only that, coming from the NFL, no experience with 3-3-5, he wanted to come in. He said he wanted to come in and learn the system before he even sat down with the players, started evaluating, started coaching the players. So he had to come in and learn that system, and then on the fly, then try to kind of, add his elements of the game to it. So I dealt with all the injuries, the defensive backfield. And I just think, we had some liabilities out there talent wise. I just think he just didn't have a lot of talent to work with. So I think he got a lot of a bad rap.
I said in one video or one of our live streams a while back that I think natural attrition is going to be the best thing for the secondary. It's nothing against a guy like Giff or Tommy, but Gifford was a huge liability in coverage. I mean, I remember the big touchdown against Ohio State. Gave up. He got so far sucked down. Like, he was basically playing like in the second level where he
on a simple routes concept too.
Yes. And I think it was Jeremiah Smith that got the touchdown, just blew right by him. And you watch the replay from different angles. You're like, I don't know what he's seeing. No, but he completely blew the coverage.
He almost
played all the time.
He almost played it as if he was like playing like, a zone in the middle. Like he was like already, but he's playing that deep third, but he was already stepping down. So that initial route that broke off kind of right in front of him, that fooled him right there. And it's like, that's such a simple route concept. Bring that in route and then run that deep post deep on the field. And the same thing again, he got beat against Wisconsin. He got beat against Indiana. And it was all the same thing. Like his eyes would get lost and his hips would get completely flipped around and he'd be out of position and be, donezo for him. So not to rag on Gift too much. I don't think that was just a good spot for him to be in. I don't think that was his ideal position. But yeah, I'm excited for what Butler's going to bring to this defense. And we saw it against Boston College. You see that aggressiveness that he's probably going to bring down there too. So now looking at the D-line coach, Terry Braden, I don't think anybody is going to, bat an eye at Braden being, and Braden kind of had a history before of working with quarterbacks. I think he was a quarterback.
He was a quarterback at HBCU, I believe.
Yep. And I think he initially wanted to work with quarterbacks, but I kind of broke down the story about him in one of my live streams too, just kind of, a lot of kind of how he came to be a coach and stuff like that. But what automatically jumps out about him is he is just passionate about the players that play for him, and he loves coaching. And I think that kind of shows through in just when he talks and the way he, interacts with players. He is just a passionate coach, but he's a player's coach at the same time. I think Brad's going to be excellent on this D-line.
Yeah. It was nice too, seeing on Twitter that the whole D-line, like the whole Super Bowl week, they were doing like a send-off because they know it's their last chance potentially to ever work with him again. And so they were all doing different activities and posing for pictures with him. So it was nice to see that his players love him, his players respect him. He's going to bring that same passion, that same energy you were talking about to Nebraska's defensive line room. And it'll translate on the recruiting trail. It might take him some time because he hasn't really recruited much. Yeah. And that's my one concern, is just how good is he at recruiting? Because that's the lifeblood of every program.
Exactly. Absolutely. And then, so we got Braden coming in, Phil Snow got,
I don't know what he does here.
Phil Snow, me neither.
Yeah.
I think he's like almost like maybe a quality assurance coach, oversees making sure everybody's on their P's and Q's for Rule, defensive backs coach Addison Williams, who I am super excited about.
Probably the biggest hire.
That is
in my opinion.
Caleb, if you're looking for the under the radar hire, that is mine. That is my favorite hire of
Yeah.
all of these for sure. Defensive
Mine as well.
Defensively.
Former defensive coordinator Scott Frost wanted to keep him at UCF, and he came here, ironically. So,
yep. And at
huge hire.
UCF, he did excellent things. I still have my notes here from when I did a video on him, just about how good he was over at UCF. But each and every year, wherever he was, defense has improved. The defensive backs improved, the DBs or the defense improved when he was defensive coordinator. So if we're looking at him at UCF, so in 2021, when he was the cornerbacks coach, UCF's efficiency defensively improved 97 spots. They went, they ranked 7th. They allowed 89.1 fewer passing yards per game compared to the previous year. In 2023, as a defensive coordinator, he had UCF's secondary to allow the fewest passing yards per game in the Big 12 Conference, 196.7. They ranked 3rd in team defensive passing efficiency with 120.32, and they only permitted 12 touchdown passes, the fewest since 2001. So in 2024, people talk a little bit about 2024 and the decrease in their defense in 2024, or kind of the regression. Well, that's because their head coach is a moron and brought on a co-defensive coordinator who then got fired 7 or 8 games into the season. So yeah, of course, he's not running his defense anymore. He's got somebody else he's got to deal with running multiple. Yeah, so that should show you right there that that defense was a product of him 100%, and he's shown his ability to develop players. He's recruited. Yep, he's recruited some really good guys. So I think he's all around good hire, but he also fits that kind of downhill aggressive style of defense that John Butler wants to run. Yeah. That's how he is with his defensive backs as well. So yeah, what's your take on that?
He's part of the reason why you've seen Nebraska reshift from Texas to Florida and recruiting. All those Florida kids they brought up a couple of weeks ago, all of them were talking about their relationship with Addison because he'd been recruiting them at UCF.
Yep.
So he's going to bring some dudes to Nebraska. And on top of that, like you've already mentioned, just a consistent track record of really good defensive back rooms, really good secondaries. I think he's probably the best hire from this cycle.
I agree. Yeah, having him and Simpson down in Florida is huge.
Yeah, Phil Simpson and him are going to raid Florida. Like it's going to be Nebraska Southeast.
Yeah, because Simpson's got that Miami-Dade County, kind of
coached there too.
Yep, kind of got that on lock. And then Addison Williams, has been actively recruiting down there for a while now. So yeah, that's definitely reestablishing that Florida connection is going to be good, because I did a full breakdown on kind of Scott Frost's recruiting classes and how he just had no plan in recruiting. And then once kind of the other Florida schools improved a little bit after, UCF, and he had been in Nebraska for a little while, he stopped getting the top guys out of that state and stopped really landing a high percentage of guys out of that state too. So, can't tell you how excited I am about Addison Williams. One of the things too is if you weren't excited about the John Butler hire, these assistant hires have to get you amped up. I don't care how you felt about the Butler hire.